Okay everyone, let's go ahead and get it started finally. Let's go ahead and compare the iPad 10th generation against the M1 iPad Air, the current generation, the iPad Air 5, and see which specific one you should go and pick up. Now, I have lots of things to say between both of these, and honestly, this video might be a little bit more harsh on certain iPads and certain features between both, but regardless, you can buy both of these iPads either on the Apple Store or links in the description. If you get them from the links in the description, you'll be helping support the channel at the same time. So I'd really appreciate it. But regardless, with both of these iPads, they are so similar yet so different, it is not even funny. And Apple did very interesting things with this current generation of, the iPad 10s. They have increased the price tag. They have given us a watered down version of, I think, an iPad Air 5. And that is pretty much the best way to describe it. It is a inferior iPad to the iPad Air 5 in every single way, yet it is cheaper, but there's still so many similarities between them, it's not even funny. So I do think still, even though that's the case, I do think the iPad 10 is a better value per dollar per se, possibly. I mean, $600 for the iPad Air 5 versus $449 for the iPad 10, the base model. I think with that price difference, it may make a little bit more sense if you want to save the most amount of money. Going for the iPad 10, you're kind of getting the same experience, but there are things that are kind of annoying with the iPad 10 that just strike me the wrong way. Now, the display sizes between both are exactly the same. So you're getting 10.9 inches liquid retina displays with True Tone on both of them. So there really isn't that big of a difference between them. I have heard some stories that the iPad Air 5 screen is better, but I will tell you from day-to-day activities, you're probably not going to notice that big of a difference. But if you want the better display, the iPad Air 5 is probably going to be the better one. But they are both 60Hz panels, so definitely keep that in mind. You also have more colors you can choose from on the iPad Air 5 than the iPad 10, but I will say, in my opinion, I do like the colors of the iPad 10 more than the iPad Air 5. So it's a little conflicting thing, but you do have more color options you can choose from the iPad Air 5, so I think that's a really cool thing. Now, they both have USB-C ports at the bottom, but they are a little bit different. So with the iPad, I mean, they have the same features and everything, but because the Apple Pencil 2 is supported on the iPad Air 5, you can actually charge up your Apple Pencil on the side of the iPad Air 5. Unfortunately, on the iPad Air, 10 generation, and this is one of the most annoying things about it, you actually do not get Apple Pencil 2 support on that iPad, even though it supports USB-C and it supports, flat sides, which is where you would go ahead and connect the Apple Pencil 2. We're not getting that on the iPad 10, which makes no sense. We actually have to buy a dongle and then connect the dongle to the iPad via a wire and then plug in the Apple Pencil on the other side. It is very weird. I don't know why Apple went this direction. It is so unlike them, yet it's so like them. I don't even know how I feel about it, but it is one of those things that really kind of strike me off with the iPad 10, to be honest. Now on the back, pretty much the same back. There's really not that big of a difference. They have the same type of styling for the most part. They have the single camera setup on the top left corner as well as, like the microphone and everything on the back too. So there really isn't that big of a difference. They also both do not have a flash on either one of the cameras, which is honestly kind of interesting. So you're honestly getting very similar type of exteriors. There isn't that big of a difference, I would say, from one body to the other. And if you gave me an iPad Air 5, if you gave me an iPad 10, I don't think I'd be able to tell the biggest difference immediately, but I would be able to tell with the Apple Pencil, the little magnetic slide thing that's on the side. I'd be able to tell, that is the iPad Air 5, that's the iPad 10. Beyond that, very similar type of design. They also don't have headphone jacks either on both of them. Now in the camera department, this is also a very similar experience you're getting on both. Now these are 12 megapixel wide angle cameras. So I would say this is kind of like an iPhone XR camera. So the not budget phone, but like the mid-tier phone that came out in 2018 from Apple, the iPhone XR, that is probably the same camera you're getting in these things. So if you have an iPhone, XS or newer, you are probably going to be getting a better camera from your phone than on your iPad. So I don't know how many people are going to be using their iPads as their main camera device. On the front, you do have that 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera on the iPad Air 5, where on the iPad 10, you have that landscape ultra-wide front camera. So this might be another way you can differentiate the two. The camera being in the ultra-wide standpoint on the iPad 10, I think is actually really cool. And I do kind of wish that more iPads actually ended up in this type of direction. I think this is a really cool thing that you're getting on the iPad 10. And I do think the future iPads like the iPad probably 11, as well as the iPad Pros and the iPad Airs, and maybe even the iPad Minis are also going to support this landscape ultra-wide camera. I think it's a really cool feature, and I can't wait for it to be brought over to the other ones. But the quality of the cameras are going to almost be identically the same. So as far as I can tell, it's going to be the same. There may be some computational differences that the chipsets inside can do, but in terms of the hardware, like I said, pretty much exactly the same thing. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of software and longevity, this is where things get very, very complicated. So we have two different variations of chipsets between these. On the iPad 10, we have the Apple A14 Bionic chip. On the iPad Air 5, we have the M1 chip. The M1 chip is the same one that's in the first generation M1 MacBook Pro and M1 MacBook Air, as well as the M1 Mac Mini. On the iPad 10, that has the same chipset kind of as the iPhone 12. Like, it came on in 2020, but the M1 chipset also kind of came on in 2020 as well. So it's kind of a little bit of an interesting experience we're getting between both. I would probably argue that both these chipsets are going to be lasting roughly around the same time. But if there's one chipset that had the higher likelihood of outlasting the other one, it would probably be the M1 chip. Because Apple makes it, they make the A14 chip as well. But because they spent so much time advertising that M chipset and the whole entire M series, I feel like Apple is probably going to go ahead and probably spend more time and effort on that iPad rather than the A14 Bionic, if I'm being honest. So I would probably say the iPad Air 5 is probably going to outlast the iPad 10, at least in my opinion. Now, in the performance segment, this is also a very interesting thing. So in the raw numbers that Apple gives you, the A14 Bionic had a 6-core CPU and a 4-core GPU inside. With the iPad Air 5, with the M1 chip, you're getting 8-core CPUs and you're getting 8-core GPU inside of it. Now, I'm not too sure. Apple actually doesn't tell us how much RAM is inside the iPad 10, but I'm assuming it's going to be about 4 gigabytes of RAM. The iPad Air 5 is 8 gigabytes of RAM. Now, those numbers can shift, but with the iPad Air 5, that's what we're getting, which is really cool. Very weird they did not give us the RAM number on the iPad 10, which is very, very strange. But I will tell you, in my experience, both of these iPads, okay, whatever you're going to be doing on your iPad, you might not even, exceed the threshold of maximizing these chipsets. Meaning, if I was given the iPad 10 and if I was given the iPad Air 5, I might be able to tell small little things here and there. But because both these things use the gesture-based design, they're both on iPad OS, and since it's so optimized and so smooth at this point, I feel like I wouldn't be exceeding like the maximum power and or efficiency on the iPad 10. I feel like the iPad 10 could do everything I wanted to do on that iPad. Video editing for the most part would be kind of annoying. I'm used to macOS, but I could do video editing, gaming, pretty much everything I would want to do on a MacBook I can do on an iPad. And the iPad 10 has more than enough power for me personally. Now the iPad Air 5 does take it up a notch. I think it has more RAM, which is really cool, but that M chipset is almost the same one that's inside of my 14-inch MacBook Pro right now, but it is the exact same chipset that was inside my previous M1 MacBook Pro. And I had an amazing time with that M1 MacBook Pro. I still use it sometimes, and it's an amazing MacBook. I love that thing. It has tons of power built into it. And I think if I were to go and buy another MacBook, it'd definitely be another M series of chipset. If any laptop I would buy, whether it would be like a, Intel or whatever, I'd definitely buy another MacBook with the M series chipset because it's so good. So that is one thing to keep in mind. But I do think if we're coming from, the perspective of, are you going to exceed the maximum threshold? I think the iPad 10 is still going to be more than enough powerful for most people. If you're a student taking notes, you're going to be fine. If you're gaming, if you're video editing, really anything you'd ever want to do in this day and age, you'll be perfectly fine with the iPad 10. But if you need that more power, then the iPad Air 5 is definitely going to be there for you. Now, that kind of covers up a majority of the things I wanted to hit on. Really, everything else is very similar. Apple states that the battery life between these two things are going to be probably the same. And really, the big thing here is that, in my opinion, Apple kind of shifted their opinion or kind of shifted their viewpoint, at least my viewpoint, on their iPad lineup. It seems like the iPad 10 was a very strange thing to do. Either they shouldn't have, given us Apple Pencil 1 support. They should have given us Apple Pencil 2 support, and they also shouldn't have increased the price tag as much. But I see what they're doing. They're trying to increase profits and everything. But I do think if you can get an iPad Air 4 in the used market, that might be a better deal. If you buy an iPad Air 5, I would say go for it if you have the money. But at that point, I would just go for the iPad Pros. Those things are very, very powerful, and you are getting a ProMotion display on those things. So I think the iPad 10 is good, but I don't know if it's necessarily worth the money when you can buy an iPad Air 4 in the used market for probably the same price, if not cheaper. So that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.